the thing that really unlocks this is the transition to standalone. So everyone knows currently 5G hangs off of a 4G network, essentially. It's hosted on a 4G network and a 4G core.
Yeah.
By moving to 5G standalone, I think that's going to, and I think we're producing some research that's going to come out just before MWC, where essentially we're going to call it that, that transition now to 5G core and SA is well and truly underway.
Yeah.
Operators around the world are doing it. The networks come live. Some are already live, but it's really an important factor now. And
I didn't even know you needed a new SIM card to do 5G SA. That's something I learnt today. And I probably should have known that. But
no, not necessarily. It depends.
Oh, okay.
But that transition, it requires a really big network, a RAN, a coverage network. It requires a telco cloud platform. It requires a new core network. So this is all a lot of work. It's all technical. It's all difficult. It's all newish. But once you have that unlocks really a lot of capability that we haven't seen yet. So to that point, you have a fair comment, but.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast that we've started recording just as Ian started scoffing a chocolate. So, Ian, what do you reckon about stuff in general?
Really good.
The guest situation was dynamic this week. We had a guest slated in, and for the second week running, the guest called a sickie at the last minute, which is fine. Get well soon. I won't obviously name them. There's no need. But get well soon, that person, if you're listening. But then we were in town anyway for a briefing with BT, and our colleague Gabriel Brown, analyst at Heavy Reading, was in town. And then I saw him in the office, and I went, Gabe, someone's just bailed. Do you fancy stepping in? And Gabe obliged. So we're very lucky to have him as a special guest. And we reckon it might have been about a year and a half since you were last on the pod.
Sounded like it.
Yeah. So long overdue. So it's great to have you, mate. And thanks a lot for being so flexible. Because I'm sure you've got all sorts of stuff that you could be doing instead of this. So that's that. So as I've already alluded to, one of the segments we're going to talk about is that BT got a bunch of journalists and analysts for a breakfast briefing on a Friday morning, which was a bit cruel, I thought, especially as they must have known that me and Ian were going to be out on the lash the night before. Give a shout out to Babel there. PR agency.
Other journalists as well.
You what?
Other people are out on the lash at the
yeah, indeed.
Thing.
I know, but we're the ones that matter.
We're the important ones.
So Babel, another PR agency we're very close to, did their sort of primo-war Congress piss-up equivalent to the one we went to a couple of weeks ago with CC Group. I felt less damaged this morning than I did after the CC Group one. Mm. I think we were both struggling quite a lot the day after the CC Group one.
Did you drink the same alcohol?
Well, do you know what? There was a really dangerous moment because Ian and I were both going, look, and this is futile. He and I trying to be each other's conscience when it comes to drinking sensibly. But we were both going, look, we can't go too mental because we've got this BT thing. We had to be in Covent Garden from 9 a.m. to sit and listen to them go on about networks. And you don't want to be sort of hanging out your arse while you're listening to all that stuff. And but then Narelle, who's one of the owners of Babel, about 9 o'clock, she confided in me that, when you hire out a room, there's always a minimum spend to hire out the room. And she said, we're still 400 quid short of our minimum spend. In other words, we're spending that 400 quid no matter what. So I was like, Ian, I'm going to regret telling you this.
That's what you want to be told, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm going to regret telling you this, but we're sort of morally obliged to burn through 400 quid's worth of booze. So we might as well start ordering silly drinks. So we just hit the old fashions, and Ray was there, and he was sort of turns you towards the Negroni side, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So there were lots of old fashions and Negronis, and I'm surprised that we didn't feel rougher after all that.
Yeah, same.
What that says about how my metabolism's almost entirely given over to dealing with alcohol rather than food.
Maybe it's your new fitness regime that's made you cope with it.
Yeah. I went and had a like an MOT where they just sort of check everything out and make sure you haven't got some. I don't seem to have any life-threatening illnesses. Everyone will be relieved to hear. But But it did sort of make me think, yeah, I'm going to try a little bit harder. And I've started getting up in the morning and doing exercise first thing.
Oh, that's good.
Because one of the things they said, that they said exercising in the evening's not good because your sort of adrenaline melatonin balance, you want adrenaline high during the day and melatonin high in the evening to help you get to sleep. And obviously doing strenuous exercise, and I use strenuous advisedly in my sense, brings up your adrenaline, so it kind of fucks it all up. So it's much better to do that in the morning.
I go running in the evening.
Yeah, but then do you find it easy to get to sleep?
No.
Yeah, well, I rest my case.
But I don't find it easy to get to sleep.
I put it to you, sir, that you've just proven my point.
All this booze as well doesn't help with sleeping.
No, booze. Well, it helps you get to sleep. It just gives you a shit quality of sleep while you're there. No, you're right. I mean, that was the biggest thing. And this isn't to in any way devalue this sort of MOT. I think they called it a 360 health check. But the big takeaway from it is be less of a fat alcoholic bastard. And I was like, okay, yeah, I hear you.
When they asked how many units of alcohol do you like cut it in half, and it was still like, whoa.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I sort of said, and to be honest, I think I underguessed. I think I went for, I said about 30 units a week, something like that. Yeah, I know.
I think an old fashioned is like 4 already.
Well, quite. I had about 60 last night, didn't I? And they went, well, we like to have a maximum of 14. I was like, okay, all right. And then they started talking about binge drinking, and I was like, well, it's not really binge drinking; it's just drinking a lot.
You was binge.
Yeah. And so, we had to sort of just agree that some of my habits are not ideal and sort of leave it there. But anyway, I'm trying to be good, and I've been getting up in the morning and going for runs and working out and all that sort of thing.
I think they're onto something. I mean, I've been on it 12 units a week for quite a while.
Right.
Recommend it, yeah. It's only about 5 pints a week.
Yeah. But you're much better at moderation in general, I think.
There's no way
Or did you have a time in your life where you were really smashing it?
Yeah, fair point.
He's not going to be able to cope with 5 pints a week.
No, I mean, we'll have loads more than that today. Because we always go out to the pub after and have at least 2 rounds, at least 4 after the pod, and we'll have had 6 pints by about 7 p.m.
So for the 60 units you had last night.
Yeah. Oh, although I have been being good, I'm sticking with my not drinking Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday thing. But then, as we were just chatting about on the way over, that was another little bit of random bullshit. So we went to this BT thing, which is in Covent Garden, and then I went to Ian. It's not that far from the office. It's about 20-minute walk from the office. Let's just walk there. Fortunately, it pissed it down all the way.
Yeah.
But yeah, what was it? No, I forgot what took me on that tangent. What did you say?
You drink too much. So much that your brain's gone to mush.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm wittering. I'll just shut up. So that was that. But anyway, shout out to Babel. Thanks a lot for that, for leading us astray. And that was really good fun. And it's great to chat to them all. And yeah, we basically, a lot of what we're going to talk about today is us being out and about and doing journalisming. So we're going to start by talking about the BT thing that all 3 of us were at. And then we're going to go on to a thing that you and Andrew went to, where 3 got you up to Glasgow to talk about small cells and Open RAN or something like that. I wasn't there, so I won't try and paraphrase any further. I'll let you explain that. And then we're going to finish off by chatting about a story I wrote up, just because I think it's a bit interesting in the context of the metaverse, which is that Disney has struck up a strategic relationship with a games developer called Epic, who are best known for a game called Fortnite. And they've even invested $1.5 billion in the company. And it looks like through Fortnite, there'll be some kind of Disney metaverse option. And I just think the interesting thing about it is it perhaps focuses what the metaverse is actually going to be in practice, as opposed to this sort of utopian vague shit that it's certainly never convinced you or I, has it, Ian? The metaverse stuff. So that's why we can talk about that. So yeah, so I think I might just start, Gabe, seeing as you're our honoured guest and you're at this thing with BT. Perhaps you could just start by giving us a sort of top line, what you took from the event we had this morning. And Pierre wants to get closer to the mic.
Yeah, I mean, it was billed as the BT network strategy update, right?
Yeah.
With a mixture of analysts and journalists.
That's right.
A lot of the journalists were looking worse for wear. I'll give you that as well.
I thought Ray's voice was about an octave deeper than usual.
I won't say anything, but
especially-
there were some gravelly voices around.
Yeah.
His voice was gravelly. Yeah.
It was. Fair play to him.
Yeah.
And yeah, they kind of went through the update. I think Howard Watson started with this Roaring Twenties analogy.
Yeah. What was he saying there? What was the point
Something
of that?
about we're in 2020 now. The 1920s were good for business, so I kind of got it, but yeah.
Sort of drawing some weird analogies, wasn't there? That was some similar kind of.
Is he trying to say we're in the Roaring 20s now?
Inflation. Yeah, I think there was a picture on one slide of guys like laying copper cable, and
So the Great Depression is in a few years.
equivalent now is. Yeah.
Well, that's exactly where his analogy. And then there's another massive war. So that
Brilliant.
was the
Yeah.
that was the fallback, the drawback with that analogy, I guess.
Yeah.
I think what he was trying to say, we're on a cusp of potentially a kind of industrial revolution, if you like, of the next age or something.
Right.
Which was
At which-
heavy duty for 9 a.m. Right, but.
Yeah, it was a bit. I've got to admit, even my shitty attention span was really struggling in that, and that's no fault of theirs. Although I must say, and this won't come any surprise to sort of Alex or Paul who's listening to this, some of their software architecture rectangle slides were especially punishing on a Friday morning. But anyway, sorry, I interrupted you.
But yeah, basically, fair enough. There are some pretty interesting things happening. And he was trying to, I guess what he was trying to draw attention to was all these super interesting things in technology and industry and in society, whatever. How somehow do they impact our network strategy and how we develop it and what do we do? And I think he was fair enough. He was, credit to him, he was kind of saying, to some extent we don't really know because it is unknown, but they're studying it. And so he kind of set us off on that foot, which was a good enough setup.
Yeah.
I think.
Did you? Because I won't speak for Ian, but certainly compared to me, you've forgotten more than I'll know about a lot of this stuff. Did you learn a lot of stuff that you didn't know, or did it just sort of confirm a lot of stuff you did know? What was your net takeaway in terms of how educated you were by the session?
Yeah, one or two bits, I suppose, of new things. I mean, it was billed as an update, and it kind of was that. I think. You go to these things for different reasons, right? If you're a journalist, you probably want to get some sort of copy out of it. If you're an analyst, you'll sort of want to understand a little bit about what they're doing. Maybe that can play into your other work, or just listen out for things you might not have got. So it's things, I don't know, just like their body language, some of the patterns, so just some of their approach to things. I guess they don't prepare that side of it. I guess that's why it's interesting. But just how they come across, what their mood music is.
Yeah, I agree. From a journalistic point of view, I like the human side of actually meeting up face to face. I'm always moaning. In fact, I might get onto this sort of perma moan I have about the nature of how journalism is sort of treated and perceived in the wider world. But someone like me, I can't moan about there not being enough engagement, and then get some engagement and moan about the nature of it. So on the whole, I think fair enough. Like we were just talking, a complete tangent, we were talking about this much hyped interview that Tucker Carlson did with Vladimir Putin, and lots of people criticizing him for platforming this evil man, and then a lot of people saying it's too accommodating and all that. And I think those are all fair criticisms. Although I don't think he's a sort of Putin ally or anything like that. But ultimately, still better that this incredibly consequential person has their views aired, even if it's in a not very adversarial or even interesting way. Apparently he just banged on about Russian history for about half an hour. But still, I would still argue as a journalist, it's better that things are out there and discussions are had. Anyway, to steer that back to today, I think some of that BT stuff, especially me feeling a little bit addled, was a bit in the weeds. but I'm still.
There's some heavy linking going on there.
Yeah, no, but I'm still, and I always say this, I'm really grateful. BT's done these things consistently for a while, and that they put these senior execs in front of us, and I think I totally credit where it's due. I think that's a good thing. And as you say, it's interesting to get body language. I would say that Howard's quite cautious. Howard Watson, who's their overall CTO, is that his job title? And security.
Job. Yeah.
I know, because there's Greg. I can't remember.
No, he is the top executive on the technology side.
So Howard's the top techie at BT, and then Greg's sort of second in command sort of thing on the techie side. Is that right? Greg McCall, is that?
I don't know what his job title is, Greg McCall. But
and then who was the third BT?
Gabriella. And mangle her surnames.
Gabriella, she's strategy, and then there's that other chap.
She's head of R&D, I think, Gabriella.
Right, and strategy, I think.
Been moved. She certainly came in as head of R&D.
Right.
Greg is chief networks officer.
Okay.
And was talking about. I was talking to you on the sidelines a bit before it all started about kind of trying to narrow some of their R&D focus to concentrate on a couple of key areas that they see as being more important.
Cool. Yeah. So there's another example where it's good when you have the little chats. Yeah. Before and after the event, if they hang around. And
he wasn't introduced or up at the sort of presentation area, but he's quite important as well. Mark Henry was kind of network strategy guy.
Yeah. So that's good representation. I mean, basically the whole top table on the techie side of BT, as opposed to the sort of commercial side, like sort of Mark Alera and that sort of thing. So I think that's really good. So I agree. Yeah,
it's good. I mean, can maybe come back to this a minute. Last night I was on an analyst call, but it's like I don't know if it's Zoom or one of them. Just analysts for Verizon had a CTO call with, a handful of analysts as well. Obviously, we're doing it virtual over, it wasn't Zoom, but one of them. Mm-hmm. And also very
Verizon,
good.
Was it Blue Jeans?
Also very good, but different, It actually wasn't. It wasn't that.
No, because I think they wrote that off. That was a complete waste of time. Anyway, go on.
So that's come back to that in a minute, maybe, just because of, I guess the big update really from BT to my hearing of it is they're saying, made good progress with fibre access, good progress with 5G access. It's coming together. I mean, Howard said this a few times. We're coming to a point where access bandwidth, connectivity isn't that much of a restriction now for most people most of the time. Obviously, if you're in a basement where we happen to be, or, indoor car park, there are points where you don't have connectivity, but a lot of the time we've got...
Slightly plays into the 3 thing as well, doesn't it?
So we've got an abundance of it almost.
Right.
But, what can that translate into? How can that enable different services or applications in all the rest of our life and world?
And so one thing, I mean, we might as well get straight to it, because you and I were chatting a little bit before, and I think we maybe have some different perspectives on this. But, my sort of persistent view on 5G, and we've said it on the pod loads, and I asked a question about it, is, crudely, like, what's the point of it? And more precisely, my question there was about the consumer proposition of 5G. And I asserted that there isn't one. And they pushed back a little bit, but I thought their pushback, for me, was weak. It's not that they were weak as individuals, because they're stating the argument that many other people within the industry state, which is the proof point they decided to come up with happens to be a press release they sent out this week, but it's something that people like them and Ericsson and I think Vodafone too have been going on about a while, which is this network slicing, and how in this particular example, gamers can pay some kind of premium to get a more robust or high performance or just better connection. And I just think if that is the hero use case for 5G, I'm just still not very convinced by it. But, do you think I'm a bit hard on 5G, Gabe?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're basically wrong.
How dare you?
But I see your point. Nevertheless, I mean, I don't think they
Tell me why I'm wrong.
I don't think they articulated it very well. So
right.
That's fair. I think you've got to see it in 2 phases. One is up until now, which is 5G's been a technology that's been in a deployment phase, and I think one of the PR guys, I don't know if we should name him because he's PR guy, but Alex.
Yeah, no,
and he said, so his point was, well, you've added a lot of capacity. It would have been much more expensive to add that capacity and get that experience through 4G. And we don't really notice it as such, but our overall experience is.
Yeah, I think Alex made that point, and I think that other
Mark as well.
Yeah, Mark made that point as well.
So that's a fair point, but that's kind of it's a good point, but it's not. Yeah, it's not huge. But I think we've come a period. We've had what now 4 years of commercial operation, more or less, something like that, getting on 4 to 5 years. Over that period, the industry's had to essentially refresh all their networks. So they've built out. It doesn't really matter which, pick a country, pick an operator. They've had to go right across their network, refreshing equipment, replacing equipment. All the subscribers in their customer base have to get a new device that's up to date with the latest technologies, et cetera, et cetera. That's a huge investment. It's a huge load of effort. It's in the UK in particular, it's been, let's not say twice as hard, but it's been made a lot harder by the fact that they're doing a vendor swap at the same time. So they've, it's been less optimal from their CapEx point of view.
You're talking about the Huawei swap out?
Yeah.
Right.
So, but it's the same in many other countries that have had this period of huge investment, loads of work.
Yeah.
And they're building out now 5G networks that are bringing huge amount of capacity, good but could be better coverage to us, to customers and to the market. So that the phase now though is to start, putting it together, creating better services, things you'll notice, and things that will impress you, I guess, or other of the customers. And I think the point that the thing that really unlocks this is the transition to standalone. So everyone knows currently 5G hangs off of a 4G network. Essentially, it's hosted on a 4G network and a 4G core.
Yeah.
By moving to 5G standalone, I think that's gonna, and I think we're producing some research that's going to come out just before MWC, where essentially we're going to
plug. I like it.
We're going to call it that. That transition now to 5G core and SA is well and truly underway.
Yeah,
operators around the world are doing it. The networks come live. Some are already live, but it's really an important factor now. And that,
I didn't even know you needed a new SIM card to do 5G SA. That's something I learnt today.
And
I probably should have known that. But
no, not necessarily. It depends.
Oh, okay.
But that transition, it requires a really big network around a coverage network. It requires a telco cloud platform. It requires a new core network. So this is all a lot of work. It's all technical. It's all difficult. It's all newish. But once you have that unlocks really a lot of capability that we haven't seen yet. So to that point, you have a fair comment, but
it still begs the question, and maybe you're about to come onto this. What does it unlock? You said it unlocks loads of stuff. Like what?
Well, I have a handy list here.
Oh, cool.
I was just looking at it. So the first thing is it's a refresh of the infrastructure. So your 4G core is an old architecture. It's relatively old technology. It's done well, but it's due a refresh. So everything you get with modernization, that's one benefit. I mean, to a customer, you don't really care. So we can park that.
And I completely get that this plumbing, as I will call it, has got to be done. Sometimes you just got to take care of the plumbing.
Calls it that as well. So
who does?
Howard Watson.
Oh, well, in that case,
so you're right on that.
One of the many things that Howard and I agree on.
Dean might phone up and go, you can't call it things like plumbing and pipes, but
yeah. Go on, Gabe. Sorry.
So where were we? Yeah. So there's a bunch of things. Look, I'm going to just read it out here. We've got things like RedCap, which is the IoT play for 5G, reduced capability. Network slicing, a big deal. Talk more about that if you like.
Well, because that was the use case that they cited.
They used that as well. Yeah, there's quite a lot to talk about there, actually. Easier and better options for things like edge, network edge.
And just, again, I'm going to put it in my language for you to agree with or correct. A lot of the point of edge is for the sort of to enable the low latency play. Is that right?
Pretty much. I think that's as good of a shorthand. Yeah.
Yeah, in Scott language.
Yeah.
Of words for one syllable. Okay, cool.
Or more kind of reliable and consistent services. Yeah. The API things that everyone's talking about. These network APIs. So all of that you can't do without doing this transition for starters. There's even things like Elisa, I think it was in Finland, who launched this week. They said actually you're going to save 15% of battery life at the same time. So on your handset,
Okay.
you're going to connect a bit quicker. So I think
that's valid.
So that's a set of capabilities that need to be turned into services, but you can work with. And then after that, you have 5G SA is a prerequisite for 5G Advanced, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to do this before you can move on to the next stage and the next. 5G Advanced, that's things like side links, device-to-device communications, satellite, UAVs, these XR or VR, AR type applications that are being, So there's loads of stuff that comes, and this is the point that kind of unlocks it really, and it comes at this time because you could have said, well, why don't we have this 3-4 years ago? Well, it's just that it's really hard to, build the.
Well, that's why we had the non-standalone and standalone bit, because they realised that the full-blown proper 5G, which is standalone, was going to take quite a while. Whereas you could bring some form of 5G to market in that non-standalone way. Yeah,
and I suppose there's a big debate what was the right thing to do, but it's kind of that's one for sort of the old timers, I guess. When I saw Phil interviewed Ibrahim Gideon on Light Reading.
Right.
So he was always good entertainment.
Yeah, he's brilliant.
And he was at that event.
That we did. Yeah, he was really good fun there.
He was one of the few sort of big public voices against NSA. He was just going, if you do this, it's going to slow things down a lot.
Right. Let's just keep our powder dry and get on with the main event.
Yeah.
Right.
But what I did see is TELUS 3 weeks ago, they announced they're launching nationwide this, now essentially. Yeah. So there's basically a movement now across the industry. So I think you're right to be skeptical, but you've also got to credit that it's a big lift, as they say in America, to get to this point.
Ian, I haven't given you a chance to get a word in edgeways yet. Any thoughts on Gabe's pushback on my 5G pessimism?
Sort of agree with both of you, but because I see there's a huge technical job to be done, like Gabe's saying, and it does unlock all these features, but whether that necessarily means it makes a difference for consumers, I don't know. And whether it makes a difference for consumers in terms of how they recognise operators or their kind of commercial relationship with operators is another question as well. So it might do things like the sort of thing that 4G did, I suppose, which is to I know Dean Bublé would probably say that this was actually more of a 3G thing, but I'm not sure I agree with him on that. That it allowed apps like Uber to be possible. For instance, and we wouldn't be able to kind of stand outside hotels late at night getting home without that application.
Still doesn't work.
We wouldn't be able to stand around failing to get an Uber without.
Yeah, it used to be better. That's nothing to do with the connectivity though, and that's brilliant. I think it's great, and but the operators themselves obviously haven't really. They've made money from the providing the data connection, and obviously all their revenue really now on the mobile side is data rather than kind of voice and SMS, isn't it? But that would be the sort of concern for me as someone, if you're sort of caring about the health of the operators, is can they, I don't like the word, but sort of monetize some of the stuff they're talking about, like the low latency stuff. I mean, there's a good example of the BT thing. I think they were saying on the slicing side, they've done this gaming thing, haven't they? Like you can sort of sign up to a service and get, like, for a certain amount of time, you can get a low latency connection, and that might be quite valuable to someone who's like a Fortnite gamer or. It sounds really good, but
how bad is the latency without it though? That's my.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you know, Gabe, off the top of your head, what a typical latency of a mobile connection is?
Like 5 minutes.
Well, it could be that, or it could be that,
right?
And I think
it just varies.
That's part of the point, isn't it? Like, if you had your latency bound in your service, which that's kind of what they're trying to argue in this case. No, I don't think slicing's only about that. For what it's worth.
Yeah.
Then that's the value, I guess, to have less
or
variability.
Have the degree of sort of a sort of minimum sort of quality of service.
Yeah.
I think.
But that's one thing I find a bit weird is the quality of service side of slicing, because a lot of the problems that you run into are coverage related, aren't they? Like being downstairs in that basement where one of the first things Howard says is you can get like a connection, and if you're on a slice and there's this guarantee with it, then
it's not much good if you got no connection at all.
If you've got a wall there and you're using spectrum that doesn't get through it well, and there's a base station that's congested and it's miles away anyway, then you're still going to kind of have problems. So I don't know how.
Well, you say using spectrum doesn't get through it well. I mean, we could get no connection downstairs.
I couldn't get a connection.
So not even like sub 1 gigahertz waves were getting into that basement. I mean, and the Covent Garden Hotel is weird as well.
Sometimes you find your connection flicking on and off, don't you? In certain places, and it's true. Like I'm, I don't know how this stuff gets dealt with or marketed, but if someone's going to sign up to a slice and they're expecting it to mean a guarantee that I always get like, a 2 millisecond latency connection while I'm doing this, and then because there's some coverage related issue they're not, is it kind of a bit dangerous for the telcos positioning it this way?
But I think you're right to sort of be concerned on behalf of the industry about how they're going to monetize things and so forth. But you also have to think about, what are the options? What are your options if you're an operator? You could just kind of sit tight and go, something's going to come along, and I'm just going to.
They've got to innovate.
You've got to. You've got to move forward, and
Well, we were at an event yesterday with, which I don't think we're talking about much, are we today? But
the TM Forum thing.
TM Forum.
Yeah, we'll bring it up as someone.
Which was, I did have some sort of overlaps with today and very much the theme was AI in used by telcos, and a lot of focus on generative AI. They had Scott Petty there, who's like Vodafone's CTO.
Well, I'm still trying to get on the pod.
He's more on the IT side these days. But I think a question got asked in a roundabout way about, because they were positioning it as three things. There's like the efficiency side of it, customer experience, and then like sales opportunities. And someone was asking about the sales opportunities, I think expecting it to be an answer that we're going to go and, I don't know, something outlandish. And the basic answer, we're still connectivity players. That's what we do. It's not like we're going to reinvent ourselves as toothpaste manufacturers.
That was Scott Petty, wasn't it? He's very down to earth.
He didn't say that, but he did say that we are connectivity players. It's always going to be something to do with connectivity. So the way it helps sales growth is by allowing you to target a customer with a specific offer better, basically, or use AI to deal with churn and things like that, and figure out someone's really annoyed about something and it needs resolving, otherwise they're going to move to a different operator. If you can deal with problems like that, then you can sort of improve your sales.
Do you think, do you buy this story about these Gen AI technologies allowing better business operations, for one thing, like yield management, who's going to churn, who isn't, who needs an offer, or things like customer service? When's the last time you had any acceptable customer service from a telco? And if you did, was it from a chatbot, or was it from eventually getting through to someone?
He said that as well, though. I think there was a sort of recognition at that event that the customer service is an issue, and he was sort of upbeat about He wasn't like he was quite cautious about generative AI. He was like, we've used it in some areas to really great effect. So one thing they've done is they've got a chatbot that's internally developed. I think they did it with IBM originally, called Toby. And they've got a lot of call records and call intents from that they're now feeding into.
Yeah, but I've used that because I've been a customer for them, and it's abysmal.
Well, what they're trying to do is combine that with OpenAI and feed some of the information and call histories and things like that they get from interactions into OpenAI. And it produces calls. It's like a call summarization engine, I think is how he described it. And you can figure out why people are doing certain things, and you get an honest kind of appraisal of what's happening in terms of your kind of customer.
And one point that was made is that
he said people are rubbish at doing that.
Yeah, he said AI is better at actually assimilating customer intents and all that.
Other things it's really bad at, so they tried to get it to do things like writing FAQs for like where's a good place to get what the roaming offers like in Greece, and how do I change my iPhone battery. And he said when they tried to do it with things like that, he said it was awful, basically. It was like, because the data's not good enough, and it goes off on tangents and hallucinations, making stuff up, basically. And
it starts accusing you of being an unfaithful lover.
Yeah, he was kind of, exactly. Yeah. So he had a sort of mixed appraisal of it, I think. But
I'll tell you, can I quickly button one interesting? I find that all the AI stuff really interesting, partly because I sort of don't. Half the time I don't really understand it. I find it all a bit abstract. It feels like last year it got a bit overhyped thanks to ChatGPT and all that sort of thing. And it feels like we got a slightly compressed Gartner hype cycle. where we're already coming up with, okay, we've all got over that. We've all had our little conversations with GPT-4 or whatever and thought that's jolly clever. Now, what the fuck are we actually going to do with it that's useful? But I still, some of the terminology like predictive versus, what was the one beginning with I that we were talking about?
Inference.
Yeah, inference, and obviously generative. There's all these words that have specific meanings in AI context that I'm still kind of struggling to fully get my head around.
Predictive AI, and I don't know if this is how everybody makes the distinctions between it falling into two categories, the way that the Verizon goes. So the Verizon's
so predictive versus generative, didn't he?
Right, I can't remember his name. Shankar Arumugavelu.
Long surname.
Arumugavelu.
Oh, well done.
He's like CTIO, I think.
Yeah, CIO, I think he was, yeah.
Right. And he was saying that there's two, he basically sort of said, but I don't know if everybody categorizes it this way. There's two forms of AI. There's generative and predictive. And the predictive stuff's kind of what's been going on for a few years now, which is...
especially in networks.
ML using a lot of data to go, something's about to go wrong, and then we can alert you to it and deal with it. And generatives, obviously things like ChatGPT and essay writing and that stuff. But
and chatbots.
Inference, which I don't fully understand myself, but it's the post-training point when you've trained a large language model and you're not feeding data into it to adapt the actual model anymore. But you're putting live data into a static model to get results. If you know what I mean.
It's where all the training
is the bit
starts
that's
paying
really
off.
Expensive.
Yeah.
That's the stuff you couldn't do in like an edge facility or something.
Yeah.
You need like loads of you need like a massive amount of GPU.
And apparently that's the big buzzword this year is inference.
Yeah. Inference is. I mean, I'm with you a bit. I don't understand. I mean, like most of the telecom industry, much as you'd think we all know about it, I think hardly anyone does really in the telecom, even in the CTO offices and the big brains behind the scenes.
I turned to Crawshaw. In fact, I thought of him because he was at both events. He was at the AI thing yesterday and the thing this morning. James Crawshaw is a colleague of ours, Omdia analyst, but AI is one of his beats.
Yeah.
I think. But anyway, carry on. Sorry.
That was about inference, wasn't it? I think the point I was going to make was, and someone did actually mention it, one of the BT people as well, is that's what I did my column on a month ago.
Go check it out.
I called Telco AI is AlphaFly. So AlphaFly, these new, Ian will know about this because he's into running. So these are these new running shoes that you wear. You all know about this.
The metal plate inside the sole, the Nike ones.
Yeah. So the rules of a marathon are the
Carbon
same,
fiber.
right? But you've got these new shoes that give you a sort of a gain that, you can't compete with anymore. So AI is a little bit like that in the networks in that it will give you a little bit of advantage. Let's say it makes you 10 or 15% better at something.
Yeah.
Which is, in real world, that's a little bit better, right? We'd all like that.
Better than nothing, isn't it?
And that's kind of how Scott was presenting generative AI. I think his conclusion was kind of, at the moment we see it as like an assistant to make you more productive, but we wouldn't use it to directly interface with a customer. We would have somebody like interacting with a generative AI chatbot, asking it to provide help because it can go haywire.
But they do go haywire. There was a good one. I think it was was it one of them package delivery companies had a bot, and someone got it onto wrong type of topics, shall we say?
Yeah. When this ChatGPT stuff exploded last year, we had a pod where I read out some hilarious stuff where, some journalists had deliberately persisted with it, trying to talk it down a blind alley and started getting hallucinating, and it started acting like some kind of Basic Instinct, like nut job, jilted lover type of thing. There was all sorts of weird sort of manias it went off on, which I thought was hilarious, and that just added to the hype because then everyone wrote about that. But yeah, them saying they don't do that. I'm pretty sure the first line of any customer service interactions with a bot, though, isn't it?
What is? Sorry.
Like if you go onto a chat bot.
Yeah,
that's the first few lines probably.
They're not those chatbots that were developed though. Toby's not part of the sort of generative AI scene that's come along in the last 14 months, is it? They were talking about that back in 2016, 2017. I think that's a much more basic sort of different system. It's not,
so maybe I was mistaken. I thought
it's not based on large language models and everything. I don't think.
No, that's a much simpler sort of thing. But I imagined that one use for generative AI is a sort of sophistication of exactly that.
Yeah, but what he's saying is, I think they have got it within the customer services department, but the customer service agent might use it to get some information that they can feed
like
on
the
to the
Copilot
customer.
kind of, as
Yeah,
they call
well,
it.
they have got Copilot's one thing there actually, because they did this big deal with Microsoft that valued at like $1.5 billion, and there's various elements to it. I think one aspect is Microsoft actually becoming an investor in the IoT business. They're moving a lot of stuff on sort of in-house servers into the Azure cloud, and there's also like the generative AI stuff, which is them using Copilot, and he was trying to get us to use it at the start of the press conference.
Well, Scott pointed out to me,
using Copilot, and I was like, no, I'm worried it's going to make me redundant, so I don't want to go there.
I mean, I hope you won't mind saying it, because this was just us chatting before the presentation, but he didn't say anything, to do with Vodafone or anything. But he just said that he uses it on Teams, and I think he said that it's a really good way of like recording meetings, and then you ask Copilot to summarize the meeting. And I actually tried to get it. I thought I'll record this thing yesterday, but we don't seem to have the license for it, or if we do, it hasn't been enabled on my computer. But I mean, that's a great use of generative AI. If for example you record any interaction, and then it's clever enough to distill it down to its essence. I mean, that's incredibly labor saving, isn't it?
Yeah, whether it's particularly a telco thing, I don't know. I mean,
it's not a telco thing.
I went the week before, and Teresa went actually to this. It was an event called AI for Telco, or in Institute of Engineers, just over the river. Going through this whole story that we've just all been talking about here. There is this thing about how we use it to optimize certain processes in an architecture that already exists. I think it was Greg or someone who mentioned it at BT. You get a little bit of gain, and these all add up. These are sort of marginal gains, as you can think of, like in cycling or something, and that makes you a better team or better company or whatever. Yeah. So you kind of have to do it, because everyone else is doing it. So
otherwise you're effectively falling behind.
Well, this is the sort of all hype at the moment, and the race to do it, and the excitement about it is because nobody wants to be the guy that's just standing still, I guess. But but
then there's this other part which I haven't properly grokked, right? But
what? Grokked?
Grok.
That's a word from Robert Heinlein, the Stranger in a Strange Land.
That's why the Elon Musk thing is called grok. That means to understand.
You have to read Stranger in a Strange Land. He invented that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. As you were.
Well, these large language models, which are the sort of the state of the art in AI research at the moment, that they do all these undeniably super clever things like write me an agenda or summarize this meeting or whatever. Well, this is the state of the art in computing research. And so if you listen to like Jensen Huang and all these people who are involved in it, at the moment it's being used for natural language services that we're talking about. But actually, and I've heard a few people who are really deep in the next generation technology for like wireless systems and things saying, well, if we take these concepts that are in large language models like attention and transition and these sorts of things, it gets super complicated. I'm well out of my depth in it. But you could actually start applying other time series data, which is what natural language is after all, which, by the way, a good example of that might be a radio link, which has all these, it's data in a time series. So you can start making relations between that. You use the same technologies, the same computing ideas to develop a much more efficient system.
Right.
So that's
back to the Telecoms.
So that's when they start talking about, well, this is an AI native network. So rather than applying a patch onto an existing architecture or an improvement, that's what Yue from Samsung Research was talking about. A lot of it is a patch onto an existing architecture or process. A fellow called Doug Pulley was there from a UK company called Picocom, who makes silicon for radios, small cells. He's been really into this for quite a few years. We use these technologies to actually redesign how, in this case, wireless air interfaces work. Qualcomm are doing all of this as well, a bunch of companies. And that's where the opportunity is like terrific, fabulous, right? And why there is, huge hype in it. And it's kind of, we don't know how it's going to come out, but it's not something you can just go, it's just chatbots. There's way more implications from it if it sort of comes out halfway what we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, I have a question about the AI. So they have AI managing the network. Can the AI understand broader context? Like, can it know, Saturday 12, there's a football game in this area in advance? and can, or does it not matter?
I mean,
you can react on the
they're
fly.
the sorts of use cases that we're talking about for network optimization and improvement, shall we say? And that's the kind of thing that would often be brought up as that example, like, oh, you've got to allocate this capacity here or there. That's okay. What I'm kind of getting to, though, is if you redesign the way telecom network stack is designed, the ISO layer 1 to 7 or whatever. Simon Saunders from UK Telecom Innovation Networks, professor of something or other back in the day, he's saying, well, the way we have the ISO model to chunk things up to make them understandable to humans, and then we break the network down into all these little processes that at least somebody understands, right? Even if no one knows everything.
Yeah.
But we've done that to make it intelligible to us. And that, from the way we structure this,
I see. Yeah.
We've then created everything else because we want to be able to go down and figure out what's gone wrong. But if you start saying, well, an AI native thing doesn't have to have those limitations on it. It could create
it's not crippled by that.
A process without...
The worry there for me is that
Terminator, that's the worry.
Well, I mean, because there's a thing that sounds like it's maybe between the natural language stuff and where this could ultimately go with systems like that, and presumably you could deploy that on all sorts of things, not just telco networks. You could use it to do lots of other industrial automation.
Exactly, which is why the hype is so big, because everyone's like, well, we can, our energy efficiency could go mental better, our agriculture could be radically improved.
But it is used in software programming to some extent. GitHub Copilot is like a kind of chat GPT in a way for doing some coding, as I understand it.
That's an LLM essentially.
It's still an LLM, but it's still code, so it's still something that.
But for those of us who are not inclined to learn how to code, the thought that you can now have a tool where you can just use normal human language tools,
translate it,
and then it does the coding for you is incredibly.
Well, tempting. I don't know if it necessarily. There might be ones that do that as well, that will do the translation, but you do have coders who will use it for shortcuts or to fill out like. They can issue a few instructions, perhaps using proper programming language, but it will kind of fill in the gaps for them, sort of thing.
But what that's doing is take an existing body of knowledge, human-generated body of knowledge.
Tell me what's wrong,
and telling you how to do it quicker, or here's the optimal way of doing it. But when this computing machinery starts to develop its own processes and methods that are beyond our capability,
well, this is the worry.
Is it a worry or is it a?
Well, I think it's
an opportunity, and you went straight to the kind of whatever it was.
Terminator.
Terminator.
Maybe it'll be nice for one generation.
The problem is that we then don't like you were saying, the OSI stuff's really kind of helpful because it allows people to kind of, I can get my head around this. I'm looking at layer 1 here. I'm looking at layer 2, and a machine might not have those restrictions or might just see things differently, and therefore it deconstructs all that and comes up with something completely abstract that people can't figure out, and then it goes off and comes up with new modulation schemes and new air interfaces that people couldn't possibly have imagined, and then presumably you can do a similar thing with all sorts of other processes that happen in life, all sorts of other kind of engineering that's going on, and that, I think maybe it's because I'm a pessimist, and I always sort of, not a pessimist, but I always kind of worry about the potential dark side of things, that you then have a point where you are literally you're incredibly reliant on something. If it stopped working or broke down, nobody would really be able to understand.
That's a core dichotomy. What you and Gabe have just articulated. But
it could be great as well. I get there's an upside.
It's a core sort of philosophical debate within AI. When it all went weird at OpenAI and they got rid of what's his name, who's in charge of it,
Sam Altman.
Yeah, and then brought him back. Apparently, at the core of that was sort of ethical and philosophical anxiety about moving quickly towards general AI, i.e. proper AI, because as Ian said before we started recording, and I agree with him, all the stuff we're talking about isn't really AI in their true Skynet Terminator-y sort of way.
I don't even think that is, but it's still scary enough.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
but I remember when that was happening, there's the, I suppose, to crudely dichotomize it, there's the utopians and the dystopians. And Gabe, you were sort of more saying, well, look at all the good shit it can do. And then Ian was articulating that, but look at all the bad shit it can do. And that's just a really interesting balance, I think, with AI on the whole.
Yeah, I think it's oversimplified. I mean, it's overcrowed.
Well, I've obviously massively oversimplified it.
But it's the same with it's the same with lots of things, isn't it? Social media you can look at social media and think it's making us all like have short attention spans, and it's kids are killing themselves because of it. But these days I think it gets a huge amount of negative publicity. I'm almost
we spoke about it in the pod at the end of the pod last week.
Probably I'm a bit of a contrarian sometimes. You almost sort of swing the other way to what
I'll plead guilty to that. Yeah.
You sort of think, well, maybe there was a documentary on Mark Zuckerberg that Sky did, and I thought it was really one-sided. It was obviously just trying to make him out to be they even had recordings of him when he was 19 saying, look at all these people handing over their data to me when he was putting the Facebook together, and aren't they silly, which he'd said in a private conversation.
Yeah.
This is proof of how sinister he is.
Still using that as a stick to beat him with.
World takeover ambitions. I mean, it's just the sort of thing a dopey teenager would say probably, but...
Well, and also...
there's an upside to social media. There's a massive upside to it. Of course there is,
Well, and what it says as much as anything else is also what a visionary was. They talk about, data being the new oil and cliches like that. Yeah. Someone like Zuckerberg understood that at a very young age.
But Pierre's going, there isn't. But I know for a fact that I wouldn't be in touch with some people that I knew at university.
I'm not sure if that's true. Yeah.
There's an upside.
I'm not sure if there may be an upside, but I think it's probably 50-50 terrible and good. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the upside for me is that there's definitely contacts that I have now and people that I've been able to kind of reestablish contact with, who I was at university with years ago, like 30 years ago, and that wouldn't have happened in the 70s. Like my dad wouldn't have been able to do that,
So at the beginning, it was like great to get all this information, but now because of all the misinformation, then you're like, oh, that's terrible.
Well, human interactions are messy. I mean, one of the things, like most people agree that since Elon Musk took over Twitter/X, it's become a more chaotic place. And most people view that as a negative. I sort of view it as a positive in so much as, and this is just pure sort of philosophical stuff. Would you rather have a safe, orderly, restricted environment or an unsafe, chaotic but unshackled environment? My personality type leans me always towards the latter. I just want more freedom, and I'm prepared to accept the risks and the dangers that come with it. Whereas a lot of people, and this is fair enough that people are entitled to their position, they go, no, I'm happy to give up quite a lot of freedom. Look at what happened during the pandemic, for example. I'm happy to give up quite a lot of freedom in the name of safety. That's also valid. It's just not what my personality type goes for.
He's a big Apple fan, so he's in that camp, isn't he?
Yeah, well, quite. I mean, within Apple, so Apple's a more restricted but more stable platform. If there was a social
media system developed by Apple, Pierre would love it.
Disney would be on it, wouldn't they?
More on Disney later.
Put a pin on that.
But
I'm with you because I've used Twitter for a long time, and I do. But it's kind of. I think it's a great thing, the global town hall, whatever.
Yeah.
But Elon Musk has he's made it quite a lot worse and a bit better. So it's kind of hard to, for me as a user.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, that's the only position you can comment on, really.
So.
There's no absolute empirical evidence of whether it's better or worse. But yeah, no, that's I don't use it because I don't trust myself to not write stuff that's going to get me cancelled and sacked.
You shouldn't use it.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that me and Twitter...
I never quite understood it.
It's not a good... No, well, actually, I mean, I don't know. Like, Gabe, you can comment. Maybe sometimes you put up something that's to do with your professional life and then you get a bit of an engagement from the community. And I can see that being really productive. I mean, another way of doing that is presumably LinkedIn as well. Whereas
that's a good example of what you're LinkedIn is kind of like play it safe, lads, because your boss might be watching.
Look how great I'm doing.
So we're doing great, aren't we, guys?
Yeah.
You go team.
Yeah, exactly.
There is a bit too much of that.
Yeah.
I had the privilege to blah blah blah.
Yes, so excited to be meeting. Blah blah blah.
It can be like that, but I think LinkedIn you can get like debate going on and commentary.
Oh yeah, it's a fantastic resource as well, isn't it? Yeah,
and we get quite a lot of that on like news stories on like reading. We don't have a comments page anymore.
No, nor do we anymore,
and they don't either now. So that sort of happens. Some of that happens on LinkedIn, and I for sure get people like disagreeing. They just do it in a polite way, but I think you should sort of do that anyway. And that's the thing about Twitter. You'll just go, this guy's a total knob. Everything you said about
because it's not your real name. Yeah,
and it's like
in LinkedIn it has to be your real name. So
LinkedIn's good as well, but it's just a different type of
Some people go at it on LinkedIn. They don't.
You can't.
They're self-employed.
You can get some people who go for it.
Well, there was there's a writer and comedian I'm a really big fan of called Andrew Doyle, and he's just written a column on an excellent sort of news and analysis site called Unheard. Why he's going off Twitter, because he got a pile on him to do with various culture war things that I won't get bogged down on now. But he's a really funny guy, and his opening paragraph was setting up this scenario where he met someone and they were talking about some director's films, and he said, oh, his favourite one's this, and then the other guy said, well, then you're a bleeping bleep and you're wrong and you're a Nazi. And of course that didn't happen, because you never have those sort of interactions face to face. People are always quite civil. And the reason he set up that absurd fictional environment is what happens to him on Twitter. He'll say something fairly considered and moderate, and then you just get this extreme hysterical overreaction. So that's the sort of pathological negative.
You heard the Ricky Gervais version of that, where there's like a guitar lesson ad, where you pull the phone.
Oh, yeah.
He's like, but I don't want fucking guitar lessons.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like
people moaning about stuff they could easily just ignore.
Yeah,
totally. Just to bring it back.
We've gone off on some tangents.
That was a good tangent. The AI thing. So we were talking about things can be good, things can be bad, and that's fine. The reason it's a big deal for AI is partly what you were just talking about, Gabe, is just the scale and the implications of it.
Potential.
Yeah. I mean, AI has a potential to be embedded in absolutely everything, and that's where the Skynet dystopian stuff comes from, is when it's embedded in everything, that one fictional depiction is, then we suddenly lose control of it and it starts getting funny ideas and it all goes horribly wrong.
Electricity's embedded in everything. I mean, to that sense.
But electricity doesn't make decisions.
That's a good, have you ever seen Transcendence with Johnny Depp? Because that's not a great movie per se, but there's some cool concept in that where he's dying and he downloads himself into a computer.
Oh, right.
And then he becomes almighty. And then you could see like how it's exponentially, he becomes like crazy.
Right.
That's rubbish.
And then you said
I'd say it.
You said electricity.
Sounds a bit Black
One of the
Mirror-y
big
to me.
things that he wants to get power plants. Yeah, no, it's cool. It's the guy who.
Don't listen to him. Yeah, I'm sure it's great.
No, the thing about decision making though is interesting, because that did come up at the event yesterday. I think Verizon was talking about this idea of level 4 autonomous networks, where because AI, the stuff that gets called AI, which isn't really AI, isn't necessarily doing decision making. It's like saying here might be a problem in the network, and people go and look into it.
But a human's still got to act on it.
But with a level 4, it's like there's 5 levels of autonomous networks. I think 5 is basically there's not any people anymore, and it just does it.
Yeah, 5 is you
Whereas 4 is like the machines are actually involved in making decisions about what to do, and then you're taking people away from doing that themselves. And then I think he did say there's some resistance to do that. There's like a cultural thing. But then when we asked later on about jobs.
Yeah, that was your question.
That was my question. Is like, because he brought that up. It was like, when we get to this point, how does the technical and operations workforce look in terms of the kind of size of it compared with today and what people are doing?
And he knew where you were angling, because you've got a big body of work of writing about.
Yeah, I thought Scott
Telecoms
and
job losses.
Shankar both didn't really answer the question.
They did skirt it. Yeah.
And I mean, Scott just sort of said, well, we wouldn't save that much money because most of the money isn't in that area, it's in other things. Well, and then I think that got taken to mean by some people that there's not a lot of money spent on the workforce, but I think he meant specifically the tech and operations team. The actual workforce is about 25% of operating costs, as far as I'm aware. But I mean, there's always that concern about AI impact on jobs, obviously.
A bit like how spreadsheets and PCs have destroyed the workforce. I mean, we spend all our time using them now, don't we? So,
yeah, and you can go all the way back to sort of Luddite Industrial Revolution arguments, and obviously jobs do get destroyed, but then new jobs do come along. I still don't like that. If that's someone's only response to perfectly legitimate questions about, are we going to, is it, what, all these jobs that generative AI could now replace, like some sort of white collar, sort of low level white collar stuff to do with filing and organising and that sort of thing.
But they have, I mean, the thing is, because I talked to Scott Petty about this going back quite a few years now, and he was more upfront then, maybe because it was at a sort of dinner, but it was on the record, but it was more chatty. But he was talking about not generative AI, but like the network operations centres.
Yeah.
And it was a question that came up because if you look at the workforce statistics, which I've been tracking for a long time. Even if you kind of break it down further than in that kind of spreadsheet I'm maintaining, you could see Vodafone UK's numbers going down quite a lot. And this is when Nick Jeffrey was CEO, and he sort of said, no, we've not taken customer service jobs out. And Jamie, who now works for Vodafone, but wasn't at the time, sort of went, well, just going back to that question, where has the drop come from then? And Scott basically said, well, we can run a lot of network stuff, and especially the NOCs now, without people that we used to need. You know, it's like taking hundreds of jobs, essentially. So, and if you look at the general sort of trend over the last sort of 10 years, among the big European and big North American telcos, there's been a huge decline, you know, and it's been linked in a lot of cases to the use of automation and what sometimes gets called AI, but I don't think it really is AI, but certainly automation and technology. A lot of it's to do with, I know, ordinary efficiency measures and M&A activity, but some of it's clearly been linked to, they can run organisations of a similar size in terms of sales with far fewer people than they used to need.
Well,
so those jobs are being created. They're not being created in telco.
Well, there's a broader thing, and that will bring it back. I mean, we've actually gone off on a mega tangent because we've been talking largely about the TM Forum thing yesterday rather than the BT thing today, which is what we started talking about. Yeah. So I'm gonna use that opportunity to wrestle it all the way back, and then we're going to finish it soon. So I'll invite Gabe, if he's got any other thoughts that came from that, to share them before we move it on. But you know, one of the, we all know, we've spoken loads of times on the pod how it's not a great time to be an operator. It's really hard to increase ARPU. Data traffic's through the roof, but you can't charge people any more for it because it's all kind of unlimited. I guess that's slightly more on the fixed line, but you know what I mean. And then, so one of the ways in which they can increase their profitability is obviously by streamlining. I mean, the two ways to increase profitability, one is to sell more shit, and the other one is to reduce overheads. And you get the impression that nearly all the focus has been on the latter. But then, you know, hopefully, and this is where I'll hand it back to you, Gabe, you know, if some of the stuff you were pointing out with 5G SA comes off, then maybe we're on the cusp of a time where they really can start increasing revenues. What do you reckon?
Maybe. I think really, though, if you're looking at it in that frame that you've set up, I mean, when I first started covering mobile industry in the sort of late 90s, I guess, it was a booming industry and it was growth, and Orange was going to do an IPO, and, you know, it's not an industry that's brilliant time, but it's not an industry that's doing that anymore. It's an industry that's essentially steady now.
It's Balak. Yeah.
It's not. It's a good industry. It's really valuable. I know. It's a really good industry. It's really useful. It delivers a massive amount of value to us and society. But the amount of revenue it's generating is the same as it was last year. It's in a good year. It keeps up with inflation, should we say?
Yeah.
So the telco quarterlies are very boring.
But the only they are generally, yeah. But you know, it's inevitable that the workforce, you know, you put an industry that hires for growth, it has to change, right? That's just inevitable. It's the same as in the interim, we've seen the rise of web and internet companies. You know, now they've been hiring everybody, and so it's the cycle of companies and markets and technology and, you know, society, really.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think you can see those internet companies didn't exist years ago, and I think Amazon's got a ridiculous sized workforce, hasn't it? I know some of them are people who are obviously in warehouses, but even the ones that don't have that took on a lot of staff, and I know there's been some cuts in the last couple of years because of like economic problems, but those were jobs that wouldn't have existed before. So you can see that jobs have been created. It's just within, it's just a bit sad in telco itself, obviously, to see what's happening.
I mean, the telco business, it needs to be a little bit lower, good bit lower OPEX if it can, save a bit of CAPEX and get a bit of power on its pricing, a few more pounds on everyone's bill. I know everyone hates that, etc.
Yeah.
But all those three things together, they don't need huge like breakthroughs or anything, but they make the businesses look and feel a lot better about themselves.
Yeah.
At the moment, it's all about getting the lowest cost so that everyone in society can have a plan. But it's
one thing Howard said again, which he said before, and we've mentioned on the pod before, and he said in response to my question about saying, I mean, my original question was, the premise was 5G's bollocks. Is 6G going to be bollocks as well? And
Was that how you asked it?
Not quite. This is me being even more reductive than I was at the time. And obviously, Gabe pushes back, and as he's articulated very well, 5G is not bollocks, and that's fine. I'm being deliberately sort of crass. But he sort of dodged the 6G, which is fair enough. He's like, I don't want to talk about 6G now.
I don't think he completely dodged it.
Well, no, what he did say, which I'm leading up to, and maybe this is what you're thinking of, he reiterated what he said before, which is there's no way there's going to be another CapEx splurge associated with 6G. Was there other stuff that you took from his answer that I'm
No, I mean, I think
missing out?
The NGMN, which he's on, isn't he?
Mm-hmm.
So they did a position paper on it where they set out certain requirements, but they weren't saying we don't want 6G. They just were saying these are the boxes we want it to tick, and they don't want to have to go and the hardware refresh. I think. I mean, they're going to have to replace hardware at some point, obviously, but they don't want the same kind of big overhaul that you had to do with 5G. I think is one of the requirements, but that doesn't mean you're not doing it at all.
I mean, he's also been pretty consistent in public at saying, his thing is to tie it to Olympics, Olympic Games, and he wants it to be 2032, not 2028.
Yeah,
right.
It's one of those things that people are going to try and go early and be first and all that sort of stuff.
Especially the Americans.
But, or whoever, South Koreans, whoever it is.
Yeah.
In reality, no one on the sort of customer side of things going to really care much until 2032 anyway. So it's going to be a sort of...
Well, and that's the danger. That's where if you let the marketing people off the leash, give them too long a leash, I think it becomes self-defeating. Because I would imagine that your average punter, the Gs don't, they might have been quite excited. There was a lot of hype around 3G and the amount and the auctions and how much people were paying there. And then 4G, you got proper mobile broadband and Uber and all that sort of thing. And I would have thought your average consumer is underwhelmed by 5G. And that's not to in any way discount what you were just saying, but for the normal punter, none of what you listed means that much, does it?
Yeah.
And if they do it again with 6G, then I think that'll be the final overplaying of their hand, or at least for a decade, because everyone's going to be like, what the fuck? Why do I care? So they've got to be very careful.
We were all like this as well, though, about 10 years ago when people were going, 5G, it's going to drive your car. Everyone's like, nuts. So we're saying this now. What we'll be saying in 4 years to know.
Yeah.
Well, I just think, but I'm agreeing with you. I think they shouldn't go early. And we could argue that 5G is only just, to your SA point, is only just starting now.
Yeah. But it doesn't have to be. I don't think it was ever done to be presented to consumers in the way that it is. Though that's the thing. The kind of G cycle. I mean, my first job in telecom was in Analysis Mason, which is in the late 90s when 3G was coming along.
Gabe started about the same time, didn't you?
Yeah, and the guys I was working with there, the consultants who were doing bid books and auction processes, they were involved in that. I remember sort of raising the idea, I think, at the time of 3G actually being used in marketing slogans and advertising, and they were like, well, we're not clear that's necessarily going to happen. 3G is very much an industry term. And UMTS, and it wouldn't actually. They might just sort of say mobile internet, but it's become this thing now that I mean, I looked up when I wrote that thing on 6G that was a little bit kind of jokey. That you looked at the billboards that went up when 5G was being rolled out, and there's loads of we've got the best 5G network in London and 5G everywhere, and all the operators were at it, but. It's just becoming, but it didn't start out that way. It was meant to be a network change, a new generation of network technology. Once you start selling it to consumers as a G, then they're going to think about it in a completely different way from the way that Gabe was describing it. Then they want something that they feel is more tangible or is making a big difference to their lives in a service way.
Well, one last point I'll make on that. Go on.
On that point, I remember we were at a Qualcomm thing years ago at Wembley where they were demoing
I remember that.
Gigabit LTE, and I asked Gabe, why can't they call that 5G? I'll buy it.
Exactly.
It's it's way faster than 4G. That's 5G enough for me.
And companies did that in North America. They're kind of famous for that, aren't they? That they sort of marketed HSPA, I think, as 4G. Some of them, and
I think it was. I think it might have been AT&T that really took the piss in 5G. Terms of calling something. Something 5G prematurely.
Let me get this right, because.
But I tell you, just one last thing on the Gs, unless you've got any
premature ejaculation.
If you want.
G.
Making sure I heard you right there. Cut that, but he doesn't cut anything. start talking about
It's not that rude.
Start talking about naughty stuff. A shout out. One of the people I chatted to at the Babel thing last night that I haven't seen for a while is Alex Lawrence, who is the editor of 6G World, and he invited us to that thing in Surrey University sometime last year, and he's doing a similar thing, but this time it's up in Oulu, however you pronounce it.
Yeah, I've been there recently.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm just going to say that
it's the home of radio.
I told him last night that it would be great to have him on the pod sometime. So if he does come on, we will do a deep dive into 6G and is it bollocks sort of thing.
Is that how you pitched it to him?
Well, actually, do you know what? I mean, I don't want to speak for him, but you'd think as the editor of 6G World, he might be an unconditional cheerleader, but he's not. He's healthily skeptical. You know, he's got a proper journalistic attitude towards it. So anyway, so that's one to look forward to. I haven't got a date in the diary with him, but we'll get him on sometime, probably in Q2.
Yeah.
Cool. Are you all right if I move on from that BT thing? Have we covered it well enough?
You're going to ask me what my takeaways were from it.
Oh, haven't I done that? Go on.
Well, I just thought there was some, like, not any great reveal, but a few nice, interesting nuggets that came out of it. Like some of the comments that were made about open APIs and how it would work commercially.
Yeah.
You know,
why don't you recap on that?
A bit, this idea that Howard Watson's describing it as originally supposed to be sort of clearinghouse, and you know, that it's a platform that Kamara is this initiative basically to standardize the APIs and make sure that you get the same thing between.
Would you mind if I asked you to take it back one step and just remind our audience why we talk about open APIs, why it matters?
Gabe would describe it better than me probably, but it's exposing features of the 5G network that are like quality of service, and there's some location-based stuff that you can do.
And you expose it so third parties
so that a third party can develop an application that sort of taps into those and makes better use of them. And
that's why Ericsson spent all that money on Vonage.
Yeah, there's a monetization opportunity in that for the telcos, because the developers might see a reason to sort of pay money to have sort of access
a novel use of the network.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the way it was described, I think, a year ago, and certainly the way people like Ericsson was pitching it, was that you have like a single platform that a developer comes to and pays money for, and then it can sort of sell its app to a worldwide community of operators. But what seems to have
like
happened is these separate initiatives by operators, but maybe working with Vonage or with Nokia, which is doing a similar thing.
Yeah, like there was a Verizon thing this week.
I think it's all become a bit complicated on the commercial side of it, because clearly you don't want to, as a developer, a banking company, for instance, wanting to know where customers might be for fraud purposes and seeing some value in that, doesn't want to have an application where it pays Deutsche Telekom, then it pays Telefonica, then it pays whatever. It would be much easier to have, you know, a single, you know, we pay for access to these APIs and then it goes to the telco market, rather in the way that you develop an application that works with
you don't want to duplicate your effort. Yeah.
And I think that was some of Howard's comments on that not being kind of fully resolved yet. And I thought that was really interesting, because I've not heard a telco sort of.
In fact, I'd say on the whole, a lot of things we've discussed in so far, I've been struck by senior people like Howard and Scott Petty being quite honest about how, you know, early days, a lot of things are still working themselves out, still unresolved. I think, I mean, that's fair enough. It's not a great soundbite, but it's very honest of them and probably accurate.
Yeah, and then I thought some of the stuff on the telco cloud work that they're doing and how that's developing, and the multi-tenancy side of it, you know, the work they've been doing with Ericsson, but, you know, you need to sort of bring other companies onto that, I thought was quite interesting.
Why?
Because that's the idea of that, is that's a horizontal platform in a way that you can then realize efficiencies from by putting your 5G core on it, as well as maybe the RAN in the future and other stuff. They've put some things on it, haven't they? I don't know what Radius is. That came up a few times.
Authentication server.
Right. Yeah. And rather than having these kind of silos that you've had in the past, where so Nokia did this deal with Red Hat, you might remember, where they've sort of given up on their own infrastructure platform, and they've now sort of said Red Hat's going to be the default one. But BT has developed this telco cloud, like partly with Canonical's help. It's like a UK sort of software developer. Gabe asked the question. The concern is, if you're a kind of company developing software, and every telco is doing its own telco cloud, do you have to sort of do kind of customization of your stuff which they kind of acknowledged, but played down the.
I mean, I
impact
thought
of
they
that,
had their tails up on that point, didn't they? Really, that
Yeah,
was, chest
yeah.
out kind of thing.
Yeah, they did. Yeah,
We've
but
done our network cloud platform, and
yeah,
it's
they seem
working
quite
pretty
sort of-
well.
Yeah. And then some of the stuff on AI. Mark Henry was talking about looking at what SoftBank's doing with Nvidia. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about that.
Because I'm always sort of trying to write about that sort of RAN cloudification or whatever, and using acceleration in that part of the network.
Yeah.
And the Nvidia pitch was that you can use GPUs to accelerate part of the RAN software, but also have it there for AI as well.
Right.
And I think he mentioned it. It came after something that I asked about inference and what the opportunity there was for telcos.
Yeah.
But the last time I spoke to Mark Henry, which was only a few months ago, he was not sort of throwing any names of companies out and quite sort of downbeat on that sort of RAN virtualization issue. So I thought that was interesting. And then I thought the other one, and there's several stories that could be done.
Yeah, well, they had Howard
Really, I've
Watson
taken some
had
notes.
vRAN as a possible application for his network cloud, didn't he?
Yep.
As an example.
Totally, yeah. And then Ray, right at the end, asked the Huawei question,
That's
about
right.
what they're up to there. I mean, it's been covered a little
And they're,
bit. But, I think they were saying by the end of March, they're at like what they're saying it's like 1.5% left.
Well, that was the slightly funny thing in the weeds.
I wrote 1% when I did it in January because that's what they
come out with it, and then I think Howard said like 98.5, and then Alex went, actually we rounded it up to 99.
Yeah.
So that was one of those slightly in the weeds comms things where what Howard said on the spot was slightly at variance with what they'd published previously. I mean, it doesn't matter, but it was a funny little moment.
Yeah, but he came out with some details about what's not sort of been moved across to the Ericsson stuff yet. And he sort of made clear the kind of scale of the work that they've had to do, all these, that's the sort of heavy lifting. And then said, I think in March they're hoping to have the whole job done.
That's right.
And so I don't think they're expecting. There's been this mainstream news reporting about they've missed the targets and
that's right. I remember
they're going to
those.
get punished badly for it. But I can't really see.
No, they went out of their way to say how
it.
Ofcom's been patting them on the head for being good compliant
I think
operators.
It got made into a bigger deal than it needed to be by some of the national press, but. I thought there was a few nuggets in there that were really interesting.
On the whole, it was really good. I'll just say a bit of feedback, and they already know this. Friday morning, really? But other than that...
Well, they didn't know you were out at a Babel do, so...
Yeah, but they know that I'm not a morning person. I mean, more stuff needs to be done specifically for me, is my
Thursday's
point.
one of your drinking days.
Yeah, exactly. Thursday's when I'm back on it. So the last thing I need is a fucking breakfast briefing first thing in the morning on a Friday. No, but I'm just joking. It was welcome, and if it has to be at that time to fit into all the exec schedule, then so be it. That's fine. I'm prepared to take that hit every now and then. I'll tell you an interesting thing is how half empty the train was on the way in. Apparently, and I can't remember who I was chatting to. In fact, it was behind the scenes anyway, so I wouldn't, even if I could remember, I wouldn't say it because it was just a chat. But you know how our office is dead today on a Friday? Apparently, this is just endemic. Just since the pandemic, no one fucking comes into work on a Friday anymore.
It's the only day I come in.
No, I'm happy to come in, but I was struck on the train. So I'm lucky enough to not have to commute. I did for many years and bitterly resented it, and thus I celebrate not having to do it now. But this is one of the first times in ages I've actually had to get on the train and the tube at rush hour in the morning, and it's half empty.
Do you think you might be forced to come in the future?
Fucking hope not.
Some companies are going that way, aren't they?
I'll resist if that happens. I mean, I honestly don't think there's a coherent argument for it.
It depends what you do, but
as a journalisming is not a collaborative endeavor. I mean, you can have a little chat, like if you're a bigger publication, you can sit down and then go and look at assignments and who's going to cover this and who's going to cover that in a sort of, but even then you dosh it out and you go, Ian, you cover this, Mike, you cover this, and then you just fuck off to your separate corners and cover it. You don't need to all be sat next to each other at all. I would resist, but let's see. Okay, better move it on. We better keep the other two segments relatively short and sweet because we banged on for over an hour now, I think. So I'm going to go straight to you, Ian, having said keep it short and sweet, and say, Ian, you went up to Glasgow this week. What was that all about?
It was a press trip with three. and who I haven't sort of done a press trip with actually. So it's kind of good to just kind of
Glasgow's
get to know them a bit
better.
Next
one could be in Tahiti.
Glasgow's, and there was a train up there, so it's quite a long way, obviously, to go to Glasgow. But Glasgow's quite nice, actually. The little I saw of it. I've never been there. I've been there once to a housewarming party that wasn't in the centre of town, and central Glasgow seems really nice to me. But
cool, because I don't think it's got the best reputation. Yeah, it's not got the best PR.
And I mean, they were even talking about like people. There's a lot of questions in the press conference about people damaging masts. Like, what do you do about vandalism of masts? And then.
So
Ian Milligan was giving this example of apparently if you kick a lamppost at a certain point in the lamppost, the light's cut out. There's like if you just do it above the signal box. So you can students go down the street like kicking a lamppost just to get the whole street in darkness.
Drunken thing.
It comes back on again later, but yeah, it's quite funny.
But Glasgow's cool.
Glasgow's cool, and the update was about lampposts and using them as kind of radio masts, basically.
But that's not new. I mean, certainly you've got like Ericsson's. Well, Ericsson's got a whole thing of macro cells built into lampposts, hasn't it?
Has it?
Yeah,
maybe.
I'm not just talking shit. Am I going? Back me up here.
I mean, small cells on lampposts has been a thing for a long time. Yeah.
Well, it's been a thing, but it's not something they've been doing.
Sticking by that.
So that's okay.
That's fair enough. And why did they think it was such a big deal as to get you and my colleague Andrew to schlep up to Glasgow?
The big pitch, that is, Three's been building out its 5G network as BT has, but it's at about 62% population coverage, which it reached. It was saying in sort of late 2022 or something, and they haven't really done a lot of expansion since then. I mean, this kind of ties into their. If I'm going to be nasty to them, their sort of sob story to competition authorities that they haven't been able to make a return on investment, and therefore, they need to
let us merge
with Vodafone.
It's hard, isn't it? All the Vodafone UK and 3 UK comms nowadays.
It's all geared up to that.
You're just all looking at it through that lens, aren't you? Really, but
there's one of the messages is that they've got a lot of other things that they do have like capex constraints. I think all operators do anyway, even if you're not the smallest in the country, which they are. And they've got lots of other things they want to be able to spend the money on. I mean, Three's got loads of challenges because it's got loads of vendors in the network. So it started out with Nokia on 3G and then built 4G with Samsung. And then it picked Huawei for the 5G rollout. Then Huawei got banned, so it started switching to Ericsson. But all four of those companies are still in the network, which is quite unusual, I think, to have that many radio vendors. And they're having to take out the Huawei stuff under these government conditions by the end of 2027. And one thing they trade off is this reputation for like being quite generous on data. They've got a lot of spectrum they want to put into use.
Didn't your story start by saying that they have loads more data traffic than everyone else?
So they say I mean, some of that's to do with the fact that they're using FWA to provide broadband, but they claim that the average customer is on about 30 gigabytes a month, which is considerably more than.
So they've always had well above share of traffic per customers.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well above.
Do we know why that is?
Yeah, pretty much what Ian said, which is that they are cheapest.
Right. So people who are going to be data hungry will go there.
Yeah, and you get, basically.
And you're on 3, aren't you, Pierre?
Yeah, I paid 12 for 12.
Yeah, it's people like him.
12 for 12.
Who downloads files and does podcasts.
I never used it for that, though.
No.
But I could.
12 is small beer these days, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's perfect what I use.
Yeah.
But so one thing they want to do
I get 100 a month. So go on.
One thing they want to do is invest in improving capacity, basically, in city centres, as opposed to sort of taking coverage to rural communities. That seems to be the strategic focus for Ian.
Improving capacity.
Ian Milligan, who's the CNO. And he thinks it's more economical to do that potentially by putting in small cells and using existing street furniture is the kind of trendy term for it, like lampposts, which they're getting from a company called Bolden Networks, who we might even get on the pod at one point, Scott. Yeah. And so Bolden Networks is like the passive infra. They're carrier neutral, so they kind of, as far as I know, I don't know a huge amount about them, but they kind of rent out passive infrastructure to service providers, and they're kind of providing the lampposts and other street furniture that's being used by Three in Glasgow. and they're building a small cell network essentially in Glasgow. And if that works out well, and based on what they learn from that, they want to take it potentially into other cities. I mean, whether this gets affected by a future Vodafone merger, I don't know. I think that's
they could share the cost with the electric car charging company and make it all 3 in 1: light, network, and car charging. Sorry, this is my pitch.
Fair enough. You're wasted as a podcast producer.
But it's quite interesting in terms of the companies they've picked as well, because even though they've worked with these 4 big radio access network vendors on the macro network, they're using, we've talked about them before, but fairly small US company called Mavenir to do the small cells.
They weren't like you saying fairly small, will they?
Well, they're not as big as Ericsson and Nokia, are they?
They're medium sized.
Yeah, all right, medium sized. Smaller than the other guys.
I'll have you know.
Who are doing this sort of active equipment. So they're doing the radios, which we saw on one of the masts, but they're also providing like the software and so they've put it's very centralized actually. They've used local exchanges for DUs, and they've put some CU stuff in one of the.
What's DU and what's CU?
DU is distributed unit. It's where you put your kind of IT equipment that processes and the CU is a central unit, and they've got separate DUs and CUs because sometimes you can actually combine that, I think, and have a combined one. But
from your story, that seemed to be the sort of standout thing about it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that is this sort of CRAN, as they call it.
CRAN, yeah. I mean, they made a bigger deal of that actually when I was chatting to the sort of Mavenir guys there. They were saying the really important thing about this is actually the CRAN side of it and the virtualization. So it's Intel. I didn't put this in the story, but you could probably guess anyway because of their relationships. It's Dell servers with Intel general purpose processors. It's a virtualized radio access network. And
similar to Freshwave over the river, isn't
it? Yeah. And the mast
we read them on the pod.
Yeah. So there's nothing at the mast. There's just the radios, and they were saying this is good for obviously to that pitch then, and that there's
like Rakuten really.
Yeah, less maintenance costs at the mast. It's very simplified. The BBC were at the press conference. Zoe Kleineman, so she was, I think, asking about things like that. But if it does get damaged or there's problems, there's less to sort of have to worry about. Someone can't sort of go and have a go at the baseband equipment there as well. And they want to do 51. I think 20 is the first phase. 21 small cells, and then up to 51 over the next 14 or 15 months. And this is the thing Ian was saying, that to try and do the coverage they want to do with macro cells would probably take longer, and it would cost more. So there's that kind of economic benefit to doing that.
So Andrew also went up with you.
Yeah.
And in his story, he said he reported them saying that a small cell costs a ninth of a macro. I mean, presumably it varies.
It's a lot smaller, I suppose, but.
But the point is, I'm thinking about the economics. The underlying principle of what they're saying is that maybe this is better done by a bunch of small cells than one macro.
Yeah.
And if you get 9-1, then I suppose you want to see diagrams about the sort of radius of coverage.
Yeah, I mean they didn't talk much about the what they're going to save in percentage terms or what they're spending, which I wouldn't have expected them to. The question did get asked, but
they're getting government funding now, aren't they?
They're getting They're getting a very, very supportive Glasgow city.
You sometimes wonder whether telcos do anything unless they get a bit of taxpayer.
They are. I mean, one of the reasons they've done it in Glasgow is because they actually had someone there from like Glasgow City Council or whatever who did a little talk about how they want to make Glasgow obviously like super connected and have it as a place where people can come and get good connectivity in the city centre and attract entrepreneurs and all that. So there's that whole story going on. And I think Ian was saying it's been quite easy there compared with certain other places. The other thing is apparently they've got all 4 vendors in Glasgow, like Samsung, Nokia, Ericsson, Huawei. They've got kit from all 4 of them in Glasgow in the city centre.
Right.
And now they've got Mavenir. So there's this kind of interoperability thing they're looking at, which is to do with cell handover, like an interface that I don't think is always that important if you've got like 2 operators in your network and 2 vendors in your network, and one's doing one half of the country and one's doing the other. If it's more kind of like salt and pepper kind of sprinkling of different vendors, then you need to have this thing. It's called X2, I think. John Baker was making a big fuss about it when we had him on from Mavenir. That this is a cell handover thing.
Okay.
So if you're traveling in a car maybe, and you're on your phone, you're a passenger obviously, because that would be breaking the law.
I'd never dreamed
things
of
like that.
Texting while I was driving.
And you go through from the Mavenir cell site that's providing connectivity into other kind of macro cell sites. You don't want to lose the connection. Ian was saying, so that's why there's
got to be a seamless handover.
The thing that didn't really come across was this sort of open RAN side of it that they talked up.
Which you led with on your.
Well, it was pitched as an
headline.
Open RAN project, and Mavenir kind of builds itself as a kind of Open RAN company, and vRAN and cRAN comes into that, but they're not sort of using different companies on either side of the front haul interface. It's Mavenir doing everything at the moment.
Which leads into your broader narrative, which I completely concur with, which is it there was another thing which I won't get into now, but there's another story that was written this week. I think it was a Verizon thing where they were talking about how fucking totally into Open RAN they are, but all they were really talking about is how this kit they've done is Open RAN compliant and Open RAN compatible. And so you get back to what we were talking about, messaging and all that sort of thing. I understand why American companies especially like to go big on their Open RAN messaging, because the government's quite all in as a sort of strategic technology, having decided that you're not allowed anything Chinese in the country. But I think a lot of times these claims to be Open RAN are a bit spurious. Do you agree?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, Verizon is sort of saying that they're going to go to actually sort of using different companies on either side of the open front haul interface as a next step.
Yeah, well, then talk about Open RAN then.
Yeah, but yeah, fair enough.
I mean, I would kind of disagree again quite a lot.
Go for it, man.
I mean, I think ultimately it should be multi-vendor, right? That's the idea. But again, if you put it in the context of what they've been working on the past 4 or 5 years. They've had loads to do, and their argument is, well, we're going to get the interface, we're going to get the compatibility, and then as we're ready, not so busy with this or that, when it's more stable, then we can do it. I don't see that as a anything illogical, really. It seems pretty considered and careful, and
fair enough. I tell you what,
that's the legitimate way to go. I don't know.
Leaving aside, the fact that we're different individuals, an interesting thing about comparing notes with you, where I've got a very journalisty perspective and you're obviously an analyst, a lot of time I'm dealing with press releases. And I think part of my self-appointed job is to not take press releases at face value and sort of pick them apart a little bit. Whereas you're getting probably much more nuanced and detailed briefings where they're not written just by comms and marketing people. And so that, to some degree, apart from our different personalities and our different experiences and knowledge, I think explains why we sometimes come at these things from a different perspective, is that I think I'm the recipient of sort of slightly reductive, hyperbolic, marketing-y messaging in a way that you're not. Does that ring true?
I think I'm sort of somewhere in the middle of you, because take Gabe's point, but I also think there's probably going to be a lot more what's now being called single vendor Open RAN than we were expecting there to be maybe a few years ago. And I think Dell'Oro came out with, Omdi's probably doing something similar. I just haven't seen the numbers yet. But Dell'Oro came out with something about their take on the market at the moment, and they were like, their projections of what multi-vendor Open RAN will be in the late 2020s are quite a lot lower than you might have expected, given what it's supposed to be about, which is using different companies on that other side of that, open front haul interface. And I think the thing with the 3 update was they should maybe not have pitched it so much as an Open RAN project. And I think one of the reasons they did is there's this government ambition to have 35% of traffic on on Open RAN networks by 2030, which Ian Milligan was quite sort of critical about. He was like, after having forced us to do, it's not mandated, by the way, it's more of an aspiration, but after having sort of made them do a swap out, if they're going to start saying, well, you now have to have more than a third of traffic on Open RAN networks by 2030, then it's kind of making life quite hard for the operators. And it would depend how the government. I mean, the government will only look at it and say if as long as it's compliant and as long as the interfaces are there, then they're probably quite happy with it. Which is what the Mavenir would be compliant with. So it will be Open RAN compliant. It's just single vendor Open RAN. So strictly speaking, it's Open RAN, but it's not. Yeah, at the moment. But what he was
that's the only distinction I was making.
What he was talking about doing, though, is
compliance one thing, and actually living the Open RAN dream is another. That's
so. What he wants. So this is the thing that I thought was quite interesting that he said is because we've got so many radio vendors in the network, and probably will have for a while. It might be interesting in future to look at ways of using Mavenir, as kind of like the compute IT side of it.
Okay.
That connecting to the multitude of these. I mean, I don't know if you do that with existing equipment because it's not like a lot of that probably isn't Open RAN compliant, but certainly if you're doing a rollout, he was saying in Nottingham or something, you might want to use radios that Ericsson's selling you and Nokia's selling you, for instance, along with the Mavenir software, not just get everything from Mavenir in the small cell rollout.
Mm-hmm. One thing that occurred to me when you were talking about Three having all these different vendors, another solution to the Huawei situation would not be to force everyone to get rid of it. Like if you buy a pack of fags, there's a big warning on it going if you smoke these it'll give you lung cancer. Maybe you keep Huawei in the network, but when you hand over from Ericsson or Nokia or Samsung to Huawei, you get a little warning up on your phone going careful, the Chinese government might be spying on your shit. Anyway, Obviously I didn't mean that. That was just me being facetious. Just one other thing that occurred to me. Sorry, my brain's really wandering at the moment. Completely back to what we were talking about before with the use cases for 5G. It was just something that I parked in my brain. It's just come to the fore again, so indulge me. A lot of times when they're going on about this, that, and the other, I think they're talking about use cases that mainly happen over fixed. I think a lot of the times when companies like BT today are justifying like their answer to my question and them talking about this network slicing to produce a sort of premium connectivity service for gamers, I just try to picture how often gamers use mobile networks. I just don't think it happens that much. So I just wanted to, I don't necessarily want to get into it that much, although if either of you got any thoughts on it, I just think a lot of the proof points for 5G apply to use cases which I associate more with fixed connections.
Well, you say that, but a few years ago, Deutsche Telekom was advertising at Mobile Congress a virtual dodgeball game where people would run around.
Yeah. No, that's cool. That was cool. Yeah, I remember that.
Who knows where it could go in the future.
That was cool. But do you think there's any validity to my point there?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah,
that makes a pleasant surprise.
A lot. I mean, there's going to be a case where it's mobile and where it's fixed, and it could be like Ian's example.
Yeah.
But if gaming's a good one where you're more likely to be at home, right? Or I think at the moment you can't do cloud gaming as they call it on mobile networks really. But in the fixed access, it is the same issue, isn't it? Like I was noticed at Network X this year we went to, that's the Informer show.
Yep.
Which is quite fibre. I guess there's a lot of fibre access stuff at it.
Yeah.
And a lot of the vendors there and a couple of the operators were going, they've deployed all the networks now, the fibre to the home or whatever. Maybe we need network slicing on fibre access networks. So whether it's a good idea or not, I don't know enough about it.
But it stands to reason. If there's demand from gamers
that's
for
one
premium...
of the things that people are talking about now.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So then I suppose you could construct a scenario where, I mean, I don't know how it's realistic, but your kind of critical application works in your home and in your office and on the beach kind of thing. I don't know. Yeah.
Anyway, so that was, sorry for dragging us back to the previous segment. It's just been lurking in the back of my mind. I never brought it up. If we're right to move on from the Glasgow thing,
depends what we're going to talk about.
We can talk about the metaverse, mate.
Stick with Glasgow. So basically,
so this is a story I wrote this week. When did I publish it? I think it was yesterday. And the headline was, Disney invests in Epic to make new gaming and content metaverse. And so the story is, Epic Games is a games developer that is best known for a game called Fortnite, that we've both got sons who play that intermittently. And it's an online game. And I think, like a lot of online games, it has the capacity to have a complete open world and an infinitely expandable virtual world. And I just thought it was interesting. Why is Disney investing $1.5 billion in Epic Games and going all in on this thing? And the whole press release never once mentioned metaverse. But then you look at a picture of it, and there's a picture of this virtual environment where you can go to one world that's got loads of brands clustered in this one world, another. And I think the real reason I wanted to bring it up, other than the fact it's an interesting story anyway, because anytime Disney decides to invest $1.5 billion in another company, then that's a significant strategic move by itself. And there's another slightly tasty angle, which is Epic is at war with Apple, which is a company that Disney's very close to. It was even closer to when Steve Jobs was there, who was actually on the board of both Disney and Apple, I think, at the time. Or was it the company that
Pixar?
He sold Pixar.
That's right. There we go.
A ton of Disney shares, yeah.
Yeah. So Apple and Disney are really joined at the hip, and now Disney's got into bed with Apple's perhaps biggest antagonist. But anyway, that's another slightly more soap opera angle. I'm just the interesting thing, and this is where I think we can all talk about it because you don't need to have even read the story. Is this an example of the metaverse actually taking form? Like on the podcast, Gabe, Ian and I have often been very skeptical about the metaverse. When Facebook rebranded as Meta, we were like, what the fuck are you talking about? And I was trying to imagine what the metaverse means to people. And what even is it? It's quite an abstract concept, but it's this sort of virtual parallel existence. And those sorts of things have been around for a little while. I seem to remember like 10, 20 years ago, Sony had something called Second Life. And we've always had this Black Mirror-ish, can I live a virtual existence, perhaps where I'm better looking, or I've got more mates, or I'm better at sport, or whatever.
The best example of it in the movie world is that Steven Spielberg film that came out a few years ago.
Ready Player One.
Yeah.
Ready Player One.
He got there first.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is Tarek, book, but yeah.
Incidentally, one of Tarek Amin's favourite films.
What's he do again?
He was at Rakuten, but he's now at Saudi Aramco.
That's it. And before that, he was at Geo, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When did Snow Crash come out? That novel.
Snow Crash is really old.
That's 90s, isn't it? Early 90s.
Early 90s.
Is that where the term was coined?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good book, that.
Yeah.
You do have the advantage of me. I haven't read it. But I think it was overhyped, and it was hard to get your head round, and sort of virtual environments exist. I'm quite an avid gamer, and I was just joking. In fact, I was talking, shout out to James from Omdia, who I was chatting about this story about, because he'd overheard me banging on about it before we started the pod in the office. That's one good thing about working for a isn't it? You just bump into sort of random...
This is a different James to the other James from Omdia.
Not Crawshaw, no. This James, I don't know his surname, and I've never met him before, but we had a really good chat. It's great to meet him.
He's a gaming guy.
Yeah, or content or media or something like that. I'm not sure what his precise beat is, but certainly enough that his ears pricked up when I was going on about it, and he came over and chatted with me. Why did I just mention him? Oh, yeah.
Because then you had to go and rewrite your story.
Yeah, and I got to read my story and tell me how great I am. It helped me sort of formulate my view as to why I think this is a bigger matter than just the story itself, which is, I think, I'd say we were talking about gaming and online gaming, and I've done a bit of online gaming. I'd say I was telling him that my apocryphal story of why I had to stop online gaming about 20 years ago, because it was when my son Jack was a baby. And the thing about massively multiplayer online games is you quite often end up in this collaborative environment where you're kind of committed to a venture, a quest, or whatever, and you can't bail. And there are even little incentive mechanisms where if you're someone who does bail, then you get de-statused in some kind of social credit kind of way. And anyway, cut a long story short, he was crying as a baby, and I was playing an MMO, and I left him a bit too long. And I thought that was like a sort of wake-up moment. I was like, okay, Scott, you got a kid now. You can't be playing MMOs.
Did you get caught out? Did your wife come back?
No, it was just by myself. It's just my own conscience. I just thought, and he's fine. There was nothing wrong with him.
Confessing.
But I probably waited, just 30 seconds, a minute too long. And I was just like, Jesus Christ, where the fuck are your priorities? Your firstborn son needs you, and you're focusing on this bullshit virtual environment. But just the reason I mention it is that was 20 years ago. So we've had these virtual environments for that amount of time and longer. I mean, I remember when I first encountered online gaming was definitely in the 90s, and I was kind of hooked. I was like, this is fucking cool. But
you play with strangers.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's part of the fun, isn't it? About online gaming, or that can go the wrong way. Like
could be complete nutter who just turns around and shoots you in the first.
Well, this is the problem. We were talking about Twitter earlier, and the danger is that you're just, while you could have an interesting conversation, there's half a chance you're going to encounter some fucking idiot. And that same goes for anything where you're online. I used to play a game called Dota 2 quite a lot. Which is, by the way, by far the biggest esports game in terms of prizes. I didn't play it as an esport. I tended to play against the AI. But there was a little while where I would play online, quite often like on a Friday night when I was pissed. And as soon as someone started being a dick to me, it just descends so quickly into this mutual troll abuse fest. Anyway, so I don't do online gaming at all now for all those reasons. But a lot of people do. And one of the really interesting things about this epic Disney story is like the battle for a new audience. So let's say you're Disney. I don't know about you. Have you ever had Disney Plus?
I don't have it now, but I have had it.
You have had it. Have you had it, Pierre? You, Gabe? So we just been doing it, and what we tend to do is, apart from Netflix that we sort of have all the time, and then Amazon Prime, which we have all the time, partly because of other Amazon shit.
Groceries.
Then we'll go to other ones, like we were on Apple for a bit, and Catty, my wife, sort of binge watched a bunch of Apple stuff. And then once she'd sort of done their whole back catalogue to her satisfaction, we dropped it, and then we went for Disney Plus. And then we're doing the same thing there. So we've just been binging on all these like Star Wars universe things, like The Mandalorian and all that sort of thing, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, I've seen those. They're quite good.
Yeah. And the strategic thinking behind this seems to be that people like Disney and other SVOD providers like Netflix have sort of figured that the core SVOD, which stands for subscription video on demand, the core SVOD market, it's kind of done. It's mature now. There's not a lot of growth in it. But are there some untapped eyeballs knocking about? And it seems that their strategic thinking is, what about all these people like me and Ian's sons, who actually most of their interaction with the screen is via gaming rather than via consumption of video, be it broadcast TV or SVOD. Or your nephews.
90% of screen time is video games.
So my point is, and I will shut up in a second, I know I'm taking a while to frame it, but it's not a straightforward bit of framing.
What is your point?
Yeah, well, just fucking get on with it. The reason it's interesting is, if this is their strategic play, that they're trying to, brands like Disney are trying to introduce a commercial interaction with people who spend most of their time gaming, and they think they can do it via partnerships with people like Epic. So you go on and you play Fortnite, but then you might go off into some other little virtual world and consume, and in some way give Disney money directly or indirectly. So I'll shut up there, and I think I'll ask you first, Gabe, as your honoured guest, and partly to interrupt whatever text message you're sending now.
Just looking up a little note. Yeah.
Do you think, from how I've described it, however incoherently I've done it, do you think this is an interesting moment in the evolution? I mean, do you agree, firstly, that the metaverse has been a bit of an anticlimax so far, but do you think this might be a sign of where it becomes a bit more substantial and interesting?
Don't know. I mean, I guess I should state a bias, which is that I don't watch that much TV or streaming video. I watch a little bit, but not that much. Don't really into gaming.
Really? So you just don't interact with screens that much, apart from just now sending your text message? Yeah,
phones and computers. I'm always a bit telly, but so I'm not really in it in that way.
Okay, fair enough.
But I can kind of recognise that it's super popular, and you have these events on Fortnite, don't you, where there's vast numbers of people. So it's certainly a thing.
I think James was telling me that like 44 million on at a given time.
So it's kind of a
Roblox. That's
another My kid Jack used to play that.
So it's a huge thing, and I sort of intellectually I like the idea of metaverse and like sharing with people who are remote geographically at distance, and you can create communities that don't just based
similar
on
concepts to social media, isn't it?
And maybe I could even meet my family or my friends in it who are, I kind of like it as a concept. Academically we could put it.
Mm-hmm.
In practice, it's
you're not the core consumer of such a thing.
I don't think so, and I think a lot of it's to do with the older I'm getting as well, the less I want to be in that world.
The more misanthropic you get.
It's not misanthropic. It's just like the real world's, better and better all the time. And
I take your point. Yeah, well, actually, that's a big one. The virtual world, the real world's great.
Yeah, and
there's trees and blue sky and all that. Why would you want to be in a virtual world?
You can get a proper meal
or a good drink.
What's this? No. Oh, is that a line?
Yeah.
That's the only place you can get a proper meal.
You can get a good meal.
Is what, in the virtual world or the real world?
In the real world, because you can't eat in the virtual world.
Yeah. Okay. I was just checking whether I missed something.
You look like a skeleton.
Yeah.
The play, though, that is sort of interesting, more academically for me, candidly, is this, the Vision Pro.
Right. Well, thank you, because I wanted to flag that up.
And so Disney are involved in that, right? And so
they were the only one on stage with Tim Cook.
Yeah.
Right. So just to remind everyone, Vision Pro is the virtual reality headset that Apple's just started selling for $3,500.
Yeah. So you can look at it one way. You can say, I saw, I think she's called Joanna Stern, the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, name rings a bell.
Tech correspondent. She's doing a review of it.
Crunch or something. Yeah.
And she's wearing it while she's trying to chop up some vegetables to cook dinner. That's a review, and I'm just like, that's a hard no for me. It just looked atrocious.
Was she cutting her finger off at the top?
Well, it was,
But why was she wearing it? Was she multitasking, or was it helping her chop up the vegetables? What was the point of it?
No, the point is that you have the recipe floating in front of you, and then if you turn around on top of the pot, there's a timer on top of this pot, and then the next pot there's another.
So it's more augmented reality play.
Yeah.
Right.
But it was for that sort of stuff, I was a hard no on, really.
Yeah, me neither.
I mean, I use my sophisticated contact lenses to do that sort of stuff. Apple's way behind the curve.
Do you know what I do? I just learn a recipe and then get the fuck on with it.
You have it on paper. That's the charge.
But it's so early days for it. The interesting thing, I think, with Disney and this Vision Pro thing is, well, if you start filming content in this 3D way, and then you render it in the way to consume it. So you could imagine, for example, watching sports on TV. I do watch a bit of football. That's what...
You support a team?
That's what BT were talking about. That's one of the things. Everyone likes the sports, right? So if you could... Apple's sponsoring football, aren't they? MLS in America now as well.
Yeah.
If you could capture the game and render it onto your goggles like you were courtside or pitch side, and you had a great view, and it's, I could go with that. I can see... Or
even better, you were some like embedded camera in the middle of the...
Whatever, yeah. So I can see that being something that would be, I don't think it's going to be
you might pay
that
for
soon.
For it to be 3D, it would need to be close. Because if you're 3D from the stand, it's flat.
Doesn't really mean
I think that leads into all sorts of things to do with, like, you could be skiing down a slope.
All sorts of things, yeah. So the idea of it's kind of cool,
some
isn't
adventure, like it almost gets into the whole kind of Total Recall type.
Or an online, infinite world or something.
Yeah, what was that film Strange Days with Ray Fiennes years ago?
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
But that's more like it taps in the actual brain. But
it is. I know you put something in, but it's
like the Matrix.
It's a similar delivery, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's a similar kind of experience. You're in a sort of virtual parallel world, but
the main thing is, so there's this thing, the Unreal Engine, which is the graphics,
which is also owned by Epic.
Is it? Okay, right.
Yeah.
But they're the ones who render the best world, right? For little I know about it.
There's on YouTube, there's examples where it would take you like multiple seconds to, this is not a video. Like, it's so realistic. Yeah. And like, once they can render that on the Vision Pro, and I can be like, take me to the Amazon forest, and I'm like, that could be really cool with the 360 sound, and then looking around. Or there's a Titanic, render. I sent it to you. If you imagine you're on the Titanic and you have to survive the
Yeah.
That could be a cool video game.
Yeah, immersive, photorealistic, and of course there's other uses that we won't detail now that you can imagine being very popular
but we're many
as well.
years away from that, I think.
But I've used at a friend's house a few months ago. Is it Oculus, the Facebook one, to do like a climbing game, and
it's so funny that you called it Facebook as opposed to Meta.
Yeah. That's its proper name, isn't it?
Yeah, I know.
Let's call it what it is.
They went to all the trouble of associating themselves with the metaverse, and you're still calling them Facebook.
They'll always be Facebook to me, I'm afraid.
It's like Twitter is not X.
Exactly.
Yeah, I played that game too. It's cool. But then you're like, oh, this would be even better if I couldn't see the pixels.
But I was actually really impressed at how you do feel.
It's scary.
You obviously don't feel that you're on a wall because you're conscious that but you're still sort of slightly immersed in this other experience. And there's a moment when you have to jump onto another, and it's quite weird. You almost do feel like you're going to fall. And
it's really immersive.
The graphics on that aren't super brilliant, but they're obviously enough to make you feel that way. So
and the Oculus is a lot cheaper than the Apple thing.
With some of these apps that are coming out, it could start to get quite like science fiction, like
10 times the amount of pixels and more realistic. Then that would be really scary, and cool.
So. And I'm going to wrap it up soon because we're coming up for 2 hours, I reckon. I think it's interesting. We've often said on the podcast that pure VR has very limited use case because you've got to be in a fucking padded cell for your own protection if you've got pure VR. Whereas what I think one of the clever things about what Apple's done is it's not transparent, but it's got cameras on the outside, so you are viewing the outside world, but via cameras rather than a clear screen. And the only time this stuff becomes useful is if you can use it in your daily life, whether it's cooking or in some other form. I think right now it's still early days because they're quite bulky. I don't think you could wear this thing for that long, and then there's power considerations and all that sort of thing.
No, it's a bit weird. But the kind of way that VR works in some of the movies is not because you have this, like you were just saying, in a padded cell, because you have to be, there's this idea that you're sort of gesticulating and moving around.
You bump into stuff and hurt yourself.
But in Strange Days, they just sort of sit down and get something put in, and the Matrix is the same, isn't it? They get plugged into something, but
fully immersive.
But then his whole experience of it is
like Red Dwarf
around. I'm wondering if you can move the technology onto a point where you don't have to use.
There was a recent Neuralink announcement.
But if you tap in your brain, then that there's actual smell, touch, there's everything. It's not just vision.
Yeah.
I don't know. But a lot of reviews. I watched like many reviews so I can get a perspective on like.
This is on the Apple thing.
Yeah, I saw 20 different videos, and a lot of they all say more or less the same. Like it feels a bit like the iPhone 1, where you're like, oh, this it didn't have 3G, had a terrible screen compared to now. And you're like, this is the worst they've ever done. This is the one. But it's only going to get better.
But the only reason I say is because there's this idea that VR can't work in outside a padded cell or the comfort of your own home. You're not going to be walking down the street with these glass.
One guy did.
But but if you're sitting down at a coffee shop, or at an airport lounge, and it can be done in the way that it's sort of done in the movies, where you have a sense of moving your limbs around, but you're not actually doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bit worrying. We talk about sort of smartphone zombies now, but everybody could just be in some sort of semi-vegetative state.
Yeah, so
that's one of the fun things about talking about technology is you're only one step away from something dystopian and Black Mirror.
One of the biggest YouTubers did that, where he went to Times Square. So he took the subway with it and everything. He had somebody film him, and he was in the middle of Times Square sitting on a bench. And he was like, I'm in the middle of Times Square, and I'm watching a floating YouTube video, and I have like my mail, whatever, and then I'm in the world, and he's like, this is bizarre, but this might be the future. He wasn't sure what to feel with it. But
it's interesting. So to wrap it up, I'm going to wrap it up now, partly because I really need to go to the bog. I think
good excuse.
I think this is one of the first times I've seen something where I'm like, oh, okay, I can see maybe where the metaverse is headed. And just as my final full stop, I think it's so interesting that this was, to me, the most significant metaverse development that I'm aware of, and they never once used the word metaverse in the announcement. It's almost like the word has become a bit sort of sullied. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up there. Thanks a lot, Gabe, for stepping in at the last minute. It's brilliant to have you on. We must do it more often than once every year and a half. And thanks a lot for listening, and make sure you join us for the next one.